All right. Everyone's eating lunch, and you're all still here. So, as we talked about yesterday, our distinguished investors will be offering term sheets that rip your face off, devaluing your companies at 90%. So, we're happy to meet you right after outside. We talked with a number of senior leaders, a number of investors or people in the tech landscape on these issues around AI and autonomy. And the intent of this panel here is really to try to cover the gamut of what investing in tech companies looks like, both companies that are trying to cross what we call the RDT&E, or Research Development Test and Evaluation landscape, or Valley of Death, as well as the procurement Valley of Death. And that means that you get programs of record and then have to stay alive and continue to ship product, especially if you're in deep tech. And what's exciting is we have a number of individuals here who have real experience. The term I used yesterday was ground combat in the space. So as you can already see, you probably already know who they are. Katherine Boyle from Andreessen Horowitz, leading something new from last year, the American Dynamism Initiative, is that right? Yeah. Initiative that was announced shortly after she spoke here. Bilal Zuberi from Lux Capital, newly promoted as well, right? Last year you were a partner, now you're a general partner. And then Jason Rathje. Yes, new shoes and that fancy blazer. And then, of course, matching somehow, Jason Rathje from Office of Strategic Capital. I know we're all looking forward to hearing the latest and greatest from him as well. So let's get right into the topic at hand. So kind of opening question I'll put to each one of you in turn is, we're 8 years into the third offset strategy. So, the strategy that many of us had the pleasure, or for some of us it was less of a pleasure, working on. From an investor perspective to each of you, what does the Pentagon still struggle to understand when it comes to working with defense tech companies? That's kind of a term of art today. Used to be known as dual-use companies. What does the Pentagon still seem to struggle to understand when it comes to working with companies like this that are venture-backed? Catherine?
Yeah, so I actually want to start on a very positive note, because I think in some ways the question sort of goes right into the heart of, how are we different and sort of, what's not working. But I think a lot has changed in 8 years that we have. I mean, maybe it's because I'm an early stage venture capitalist that I'm an eternal optimist. A lot has changed. And what has changed most notably is that founders are now very excited to work with the Department of Defense. They're very excited about these issues. That is new. A few years ago, that was not the case. It was a handful of people that all knew each other, that sort of hung out together. But it's now a growing movement. And so I think we need to really give a lot of credit to the DOD and to government for frankly sort of saying, hey, we don't know what we don't know. We need to come out to Silicon Valley. We need to spend more time with the people who are doing cutting edge innovation. And we need to figure out a way to work together, even if it's going to be hard. And so, yes, there's been a lot of experiments, and we're early stage investors, so we're used to failure. Some are failed experiments, some are successful, and that's okay. But I think that's sort of going to be the new normal going forward, is that some things will fail and some things will succeed, and that's actually a good thing. It means that we're working together. So I think I come bearing a very positive message, which is that things are probably better this year than they were last year. So we should pat ourselves on the back for that a little bit. In terms of what does the DOD not understand, I think there's always going to be cultural issues between the incentives in Washington and the incentives in Silicon Valley. That is certainly the case. The thing that I think Silicon Valley didn't understand until recently is that capital does not excuse all sins. And that's probably also something that government and DOD doesn't understand as much as well. You can't throw capital at a problem and expect that more and more SpaceX's and Andurils and Applied Intuitions and the companies that have scaled are going to just materialize overnight in terms of dozens and dozens of new companies that are going to look and feel the same as what we're used to. There's a complexity to company building that I think the venture capitalists and the founders are very good at, that the DOD will probably never understand, and that's okay, it's not your job. So I think that's probably the big thing, that if we dive into sort of where the problems are, there's probably a cultural mismatch, and sort of the capital will not forgive all sins. But I think we've made a lot of progress, and so I feel like this is going to be a much more upbeat panel than maybe previous panels that Bilal and I have been on together.
So Bilal, you've been in this space before it was cool. In fact, I remember meeting you in 2014 when you were pushing Evolve to really get rolling. You were working through some of the challenges with sci-fi and companies like that. You have a lot of deep experience in this space. So from your perspective, how does the Pentagon, or why does the Pentagon still struggle to understand how to work with defense tech companies?
Well, so thank you for saying that. My experience in this space is fairly limited because it's all as an early stage venture capitalist, which for all practical purposes, most of us who've invested in defense tech over the last 10, 20 years have been utter failures, right? Very few success stories to talk about. So, and that's where the frustration comes from, that there are people like those on this stage right now, but many in the audience and otherwise, who deeply care about these issues, who deeply believe that we need advanced technology in the hands of the warfighters to be able to win the battles that we're going to be put into. And those battles have changed over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, we were fighting ragtag bands in the Middle East, and then we ended up with many, many different kinds of militaries fighting each other in Syria and in the middle of it. And now we're facing adversaries, doing a warfare without boots on the ground in Ukraine. And then we have, threats otherwise from China and others that are highly sophisticated nation states. So we want to get the best technology in the hands of people. We know that the kinds of technologies we're talking about are extremely rapidly changing, fast iterating, evolving, where some of the most technically adept people are having a hard time keeping up with it. Like those of us who spend all our time trying to keep in touch with where is autonomy going and how fast AI is developing and what is happening. It's very hard to keep in touch with that stuff. We talked about it yesterday, that the things that you all hear about ChatGPT and stuff, this thing was only invented less than 7, 8 years ago. In fact, large parts of it 3, 4 years ago. And we're still reading research papers while it's getting put into production as we speak. The thing that we have seen our companies struggle with is that, Kessler and Mark Andreessen talked about it yesterday, removing the middleman in the internet coming of age 20, 30 years ago led to tons of innovation and all of us feeling empowered to be able to use those technologies, right? That was the internet revolution. You could build stuff, you could put it online, you could buy stuff, you could write articles, put it up online, and people could consume. You didn't have to wait for editors to approve and get published, or your voices could be heard. That is not happening in the DOD. Right? And so there is no mechanism by which a warfighter that requires these technologies is getting access to the technologies that they need. Jason and I were talking earlier that there's a lot of technologies that we can think of that are very strategically long-term relevant for the country, and I think Jason will talk about that. But I argued with him and I said, but you're trying to tell me that this country will buy quantum computing and nuclear fusion when they can't buy drones today that we need in the field, right? There is not a single American drone company at scale that builds the kind of drones that the Chinese you can buy at a store yourself, right? So we've got a problem that the market, we know that the end warfighter needs technologies, but the mechanism to sell is very hard to break through. And that's been the biggest learning, at least as an investor, that it's not so much about the technology, which is really important, but it's also figuring out how to sell that technology, how to package it, and all the various stakeholders that are along the way, which is many of them, and some of them are in this room. How do you satisfy each one of their needs so that the technology actually finds its way to the end user?
So, Jason, now that you're in the building, you spent a stint with AFWorks and indeed stood up AF Ventures, right? Now with OSC, what are some? I'll kind of phrase the question slightly differently. What are some of the challenges that you're working through, running the Office of Strategic Capital in terms of bringing it into better alignment with companies that we're all backing?
No, I mean it's just to echo Catherine's earlier point. I didn't know what VC was when I entered this space 15 years ago, or 8 years ago in 2015, as a student trying to understand why more companies weren't working with the Department of Defense. And so I remember talking with a number of funds on Sand Hill and asking them, do you have any of your companies sell to the department? And 9 said no, and the 10th said, yeah, when they hit Series C, we tell them to hire a general and put them in DC, right? That was like the standard go-to-market for DOD. And I think it has changed. From 2008 to 18, there was about $2 billion of venture investment into companies that were working for the Department of Defense. From 18 to 22, there was $12 billion. So there's been a massive rise, and some of that's due to the market conditions broadly, but a lot of it's due to organizations like DIU that was founded in 2015. A number of these innovation organizations trying to think differently about, to Bilal's point, democratizing R&D investment to the warfighter in a way that helps them partner with innovative companies directly. That's what our mission was at AFWorks. It was taking this program, the SBIR program, which had traditionally been focused just on R&D, like early stage R&D, and finding ways to think about how do we give access to, the E5 to work with companies to figure out how you can take generational leaps in technology, but also commercially available technologies, and do the DT/OT work that you have to do to see if it's going to work in your relevant environment. The military is a difficult place often. The government is hard, and so you need to build those relationships early and upfront. And I think the rise of a class of investors like Katherine and Bilal, who are committed to working with the department, committed to working with the government to figure this out together, I think is an evolutionary change that I've seen recently. And the amount of collaboration that's happening, like this panel, is just phenomenal. I will say that this is not actually new to the national security apparatus. There used to be much tighter coupling between capital markets and the government in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, our last great power competition. I think the government really understood the power of the capital markets. I tell this story in 1957, Sputnik crossed our skies. It was an awakening of, we're not doing enough. We're not competing on the technological domain with the Soviet Union. So the Eisenhower administration created DARPA, they created NASA, and they created the SBIC program, which catalyzed the entire venture capital ecosystem, the asset classes that now are supporting the most innovative small companies that exist in the country. And it's doing so in a way that I think has done it as a disconnected part of the capital markets for many years. And so the kind of reunification in my mind of our capital markets with the national security apparatus is an incredible change. Things like IRA and the Chips and Science Act have shown a massive leap forward from a U.S. government perspective. And certainly, from my perspective within the DOD, we are starting to awaken to this opportunity that private capital markets can be a competitive advantage of the United States. And thinking about it as the capital markets, as in the economic domain, is a new way of thinking about it. It's not just about the companies and the technologies. It's about how do we partner with capital markets in a way that advances the U.S. economic a long-term competitiveness, but also U.S. long-term national security competitiveness.
That's great. So, Katherine, you last year you launched the American Dynamism initiative over dinner last night. Bilal and I were joking that we were going to call it, just intentionally start calling it global dynamism, and either see how long it took people here to realize we were talking about something different. But for this audience here that are more national security focused, what exactly is American dynamism, and how does it relate to the folks in this audience, defense officials, defense tech founders, and investors?
Yeah, so actually it's funny you bring up global dynamism, because I actually think the Web 2.0 sort of Silicon Valley ethos for maybe the last 15 years until this movement started was sort of this, well, we are citizens of the world. We will build software products that know no boundaries, and they can go all over the world, and this is the ethos of Silicon Valley. And what's exciting about American dynamism, and it's very specifically named American Dynamism for this reason, is that we learned in the last few years, and particularly founders, many of whom have no recollection of 9/11, no sort of historical reason to be interested in the boundaries of this country or in the interest of this country, now realize that that's not the case. That we've entered this, history's begun, frankly. We've entered a new era, and for many of them, they've never seen a land war in Europe. For many of us, we've never seen a land war in Europe like this. And I think that has moved founders, in conjunction with COVID, in conjunction with a lot of problems, to say that they want to work on real problems that are impactful, that work directly with the US government for the citizens of this country. And I think that's incredibly exciting. It's something that would not have been said 5 years ago in Silicon Valley. And so the fact that now people are comfortable saying that you talk to founders and the first thing you see in the background of their Zoom backdrop is an American flag, like that is real patriotism and people who are really excited about this movement. And I think the thing, we're talking a lot about moving capital markets and government together. The real limiting factor here has always been talent. it's always been, are there enough talented founders to serve these important missions? It hasn't been capital, at least in the last 15 years, it certainly hasn't been capital, and it hasn't been sort of a limit to the problems. Like, there are so many problems that need to be solved. The big problem has been, how do you move talent? How do you educate the talent? How do you make sure talent is trained in a way where they can move fast enough to solve these hard problems? And I'd say, if there's one takeaway from this, the companies that have scaled, like Applied Intuition, like SpaceX, like Palantir, like Anduril, are now like teaching a generation of new founders who are, they've come up in those companies. SpaceX is now almost 20 years old. They've come up, they've learned manufacturing, they've learned how to integrate hardware and software, they've learned how to sell to the US government. It's no longer scary. Sort of the hard work of companies like SpaceX and Palantir have given way to the next generation of companies. So in my view, the part of the reason why we're starting this practice is sort of it's a natural success story, that you've had these big companies succeed, scale, that are now really, really emblematic of what these new founders want to do, and we're just seeing demand. And so I think it's really exciting. It's not something that we kind of came in top down and said, okay, now we're doing this. It's we look back through 10 years of our portfolio and saw that the companies that are extremely successful and the companies and founders that we're most excited about and that are still scaling happen to be in this practice area. So it's something, we recently announced we're committing $500 million to early stage companies in this area. We believe it'll be the next decade of innovation in Silicon Valley, broadly defined, not just the ecosystem of Silicon Valley as a region, but the idea of Silicon Valley in this country, and we're thrilled about it.
So this is a related question, and any one of you three can take it. As an investment thesis, especially with technology like space tech, right? I've often wrestled with this concept of an industrial base for a lot of these emerging technologies. You mentioned SpaceX, Palantir. You could in some ways call them the primes, or at least the kind of the apex companies that can help drive an industrial base. But from an investing perspective, one thing I've wrestled with is when I see a series as someone who leads C+ and Series A rounds, I often wrestle when I see a company. I say, shoot, is or could the government keep that company alive long enough for their technology to actually, in space tech's perspective, get in orbit and get real customers? So I've often wrestled with, how can you build an industrial base of like primes and kind of major service providers and companies like that can actually support and enable and foster a lot of these really innovative and impressive earlier stage companies. Any thoughts on that? And Bilal, I know you're in some of these companies. Feel free to go first.
Let me address that in a slightly different way, which is we're still a global economy. When I first came to this country about 30 years ago and then became a US citizen, and now a lot of people, often look at immigrants who become very nationalistic and patriotic, like, what the hell happened? I remember there was this joke, like people used to say, God bless America, right? We all say that. And there was this joke that came after, and nobody else, right? That God bless America and nobody else. That's not where we want to be. I don't think that's what Katherine is saying, and I don't think that's what any of us is saying. All of us really believe that the city upon a shining hill, or whatever that statement is, like that's really true, that we really do things because we think that's genuinely good for the world. And but we have to have pride in what we do. So our military is not out there just killing and shooting because they enjoy doing that. Like, they don't want to be doing that, but sometimes they're put in a situation where they have to do that. And if we're going to put them in that situation, then we need to make sure that they win. And we need to give them the tools that are available to them to do that. I'm a techno-optimist, so I'm not coming at this purely from some patriotic perspective. I'm coming at it as technology is giving us amazing tools to create extremely precise munitions, ability to not have this word collateral damage be in our vocabulary anymore, to be able to use technology to actually deter war when possible, and if it has to be done, then to be really targeted around people that are the doers of bad deeds in the world, and then take them out. And so we need to be able to bring that technology in. And it's not just bombs and weapons. It's computing, it's sensing, it's cybersecurity, it's all kinds of things where we are so interconnected that we need to make sure that we have access to that best technology. Now, the best technology is developed by people who are deeply ingrained in those technologies and working day and night and motivated by that. And the kinds of technologies that I get exposed to in Silicon Valley, and I can argue that there's a subset of the stuff that's happening in the world, these people move at lightning fast pace. They want to be associated with and working with people who understand that and identify with that. We invest at the, we say at Lux Capital, we invest at the intersection of technology and sciences. We're also early stage investors. These sciences can be life sciences, physical sciences, computer sciences. But the only way that you will have these guys participating in defense technologies is if they see a customer base present to them. We are ready and willing to take deeply technical risk, venturing into the land of the unknown, whether this will work or not. But we can't be doing that as investors if we also have a market risk on the other side. We'll be out of a job, right? I was talking to Jason earlier, and I said, 2006 to 2012, there was this movement of clean tech in this country. Massive VC firms wholesale pivoted into clean tech because they really believed that our biggest problem facing the Earth was the climate catastrophe that's coming. I truly believe that climate is a big catastrophe waiting to happen. But these VC firms, for whatever reasons, pivoted into it. They took on some of the hardest challenges, right? Biofuels and synthetic biology and solar industry, and all the semiconductor guys went into solar, all the biotech guys went into biofuels, and the market wasn't there. Many of those firms do not exist today. Billions upon billions upon billions of dollars were wasted. An entire generation of founders basically are right now doing, middling jobs somewhere. That we cannot happen. We cannot let that happen to the defense tech movement that's been happening for the last 5 to 10 years. Like, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but we all name the same 3, 5, 7, 10 companies all the time. You guys have often heard Palantir, SpaceX, Applied Intuition, Shield AI, Saildrone, Anduril, obviously, and that's it. Very soon you run out of a name. Maybe you have a favorite one or two more to add to this.
So basically all the companies you invested in.
Well, not all. But
Sorry,
the point is, we need hundreds of them. We need hundreds of them. We need many, many more funds that are the size of what Katherine just talked about, $500 million invested, and then some. Why is that not happening? Most of the funds that are investing in this are having to raise capital from foreign sources, large sovereign funds outside the US. We have a serious problem that I don't think we're identifying in the upstream, the early stage value chain. And I think that is something that will only change if the market is there on the other side. If the market signals are not there, entrepreneurs are not going to build companies, right? You will have the philosophers, you will have the thought leaders, you will have the academics, you will have people who will be putzing around, creating SBIR shops and continuing to do research, licensing their technology to Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing. You will not get the revolution that we're looking for, that happened in the internet era, that happened in the chip era before that. That's what is needed.
Can I answer one aspect of the question I thought was interesting? You said, should government be investing to get these companies through the valley of death? And I think what we've learned is that is a terrible idea. And what I mean by that is, we are up here as professional risk takers. We allocate capital based on risk assessments that we do. This is our job, is deciding what type of risk capital we are going to put to work in various companies based on a variety of qualitative factors that are impossible to put metrics or matrices around. There's so much about venture capital, and this is what I love when people actually spend time with sort of how our firms work and that sort of thing. So much of it is, kind of these soft skills sort of requirements that we have, or this sort of taste that comes from 10, 15, 20 years of investing, where when you see it if something's going to be great, that to someone on the outside looks crazy. And we can tell story after story after story, particularly at that Series A moment, where there is no reason to invest in a company based on what we see on the balance sheet, and yet we invest, and it's like the fun returner in our portfolios. That is something that government should not be in the business of doing. Government should work with the companies that once they get through the toughest part of their journey, which is deepest down the J curve coming out, once they hit product market fit, once they have a contract, how can we use some different type of capital? It doesn't have to be equity capital. It doesn't have to be risk capital. It can be debt. It can be a way of beefing up manufacturing. How can we invest in something once we know that it's working? And the thing that I'm excited about is there's a lot of companies, as Bilal said, where we all know the names, but there is a next generation right after that where you haven't heard the names yet, but we're extremely excited about it. And those companies have hit product market fit, and maybe there is a procurement officer who's really excited about it, and in 2 years, that's going to be the SpaceX that we'll all be naming in this conference. That's the company that government should be working with to say, okay, I want 1,000, now I want 100,000 of whatever widget you're building. How do we get you there? So I actually think the sort of, the learning of the last few years where government was spending a lot of time saying, okay, how can we get involved in the work of venture capitalists? Like, I think we're decent at that. Government's really good at writing the big check, both on the contracting side and on the investment side, when they know exactly what they want and when they know that it's working.
Well said by both of you. Jason, I think you had something to that.
I mean, this has been a phenomenal dialogue. From the points Bilal was making regarding market risk, and talking about things like precision-guided munitions, a lot of the work not only the department did, but organizations like the SBA did in the 60s and 70s prepared for the second offset, which allowed us to have precision-guided munitions in the early 1990s, which allowed us to effectively, when we went to war, win that war in a very quick period of time. And I think that's like the visionaries like Bill Perry who prepared us for that generational leap forward in technology. It was because of a partnership between the US government and the capital markets to create companies like Intel and to be able to buy things from Fairchild. I mean, there is a long history here that I think we can learn from. I will also agree with Katherine, that economy is different than today's economy. It's a very different world today than it was in the 1960s. But the opportunities that were created, the most successful companies that created generational leaps forward in technology, which prepared us for strategic competition, were done when the government was acting as a particular kind of investor. And I think we talk about VC all the time. Obviously, I'm here with two VC visionaries, but venture is one part of the capital markets, right? I mean, OSC is mostly focused on debt, as Katherine talked about. Why? Well, one, debt's a very scalable way for us to deploy capital. Two, it's efficient for the taxpayer. What do you call a loan that defaults? A grant. We do tons of those inside of the departments all the time. So why not make a loan instead of making a grant? And three, it allows us to work with other investors as a partnership because there are unique opportunities within debt models that allow us to create leveraged financing so that we can efficiently scale these capital-intensive types of companies. Now, it's not going to work for everything, right? It's certainly, there are markets that we need to be thinking differently about buying. There are markets that we have to be thinking differently about competition from both a technology and a purchasing perspective. But in some fundamental technology areas, we have to expand our aperture, which really my kind of third point on this. It's not just about the stuff we buy. We talk about the CHIPS and Science Act. Nobody ever says, hey, I'm going to put semiconductors into the hands of the warfighter, right? But they enable literally everything that we do. But we make investments inside of the Department of Defense. Whether you like it or not, the Department of Defense leads R&D across all of these technology areas, and we expect the capital markets to commercialize many of them without having the DOD checkbook on the backside because we don't buy fundamental technologies. We don't buy enabling technologies. We expect them to be there. We expect our integrators to integrate them. And the expansion of the industrial base that supports defense has been a way to expand the amount of integrators that we work with, but ultimately, we still need to see increased investment flows, and I'm so excited about the work that Katherine and Bilal have been doing in this space, but they're both right that it's not enough. We need a significant amount more focus. We need talent, investment talent. We need investment capital. We need for us to think about this as an all-of-nation state approach where we can partner with the individuals who are going to carry the water for the country from a national security perspective and say, look, it's important for us to do this. We need to generate a return. That's the job of an investor. The job of the Department of Defense is lead national security for the country and find ways where there's opportunity to collaborate to do it in a way that's not only, it allows us to advance these long-term patient investments that have to happen, but doing it in a way that's efficient for the taxpayer so that we're keeping our economy in a solid position moving forward.
Well, I'm going to stick with you, but I did want to announce Mike Brown, formerly of DIU, has offered to sign backdated customer sponsorship letters if any of you want to send something to AFWorks. So, yeah? Okay, no. So let's stick with you, Jason. OSC has received a ton of press, right? You're on stage with us today as well. What needs to happen to get OSC to the point where it's actually deploying debt capital? And what can we here in the audience be doing to offer supporting fires there?
No, I appreciate the question. Starting anything in the government is, startups are hard. Try doing startups inside the government, right? It's just like, it's a totally different type of approach. But at OSC, we're focused on creating efficient financial tools that we can use to see the results that we need to see to support not only the department, but long-term national security. Let's say national security equals economic security. So what are those types of tools? Well, they're tools that allow us to work in the form of a limited partnership with co-investors that are going to be creating funds that are going to be targeting these types of technology areas, that allow us to do sizable project financing and infrastructure investments to be able to advance quantum and biotech and the critical technology areas of the future. But they rely on this thing called the Federal Credit Reform Act of 1990, which allows the US government to exercise debt like a banking institution. And they're actually a very commonly used tool. There's 118 federal credit programs today. They expand the Department of Energy. The audience might know that program the best. Companies like Tesla utilize the Department of Energy's loan program that helped the Department of Energy advance the electric vehicle industry. It helped Tesla advance towards the Model S release, and it created a public-private partnership where there was mutual benefit. But you may not know that the Department of Agriculture has 45 federal credit programs with $66 billion of financing today. You might not know that the VA Home Loan Program, which many of the military members know about, is a federal credit program that the Department of Veteran Affairs run. It was interesting to me as we started learning more about these tools that the Department of Defense does not have a federal credit program. It's one of 3 departments, the Department of Justice, Labor, and the DOD, that does not have one today. So a lot of our engagements has been informing the community about the efficacy of these programs and the opportunities that the department sees in leveraging these tools. In order to get there, though, we, the department, have to learn this set of expertise, right? You don't look at the department and say, hey, there's a bunch of finance experts that know how to do, large-scale infrastructure finance projects, right? That doesn't exist. But we're fortunate to ride on a bow wave of significant opportunities. The IRA is doing this. The CHIPS and Science Act are doing this. It's a great opportunity for the Department of Defense to learn. But we're also learning through our strategic partnerships. So the first partnership we launched was the SBA partnership, where we're partnering with the SBA's SBIC, Small Business Investment Company program. I talked about that earlier. Been around since 1958. Today, SBICs are not really used for equity investment. They're not really used for tech. There's a lot of reasons for that. But in partnership with the SBA, we've been working on new rule changes to their program to make it an opportunity for investors to build purpose-built investment funds, whether they're sidecar vehicles or main funds, around critical technology areas. And we hope to start providing that leverage early next month. That's when we hope to have the final rules set and be able to start taking applications. The SBA, in terms of size, just to get a glimpse of this, the SBA has $5 billion to commit to the SBIC program annually. Other partners who are starting to work more in the technology ecosystem, the Export-Import Bank. You may have never heard of the Export-Import Bank. They've been around since FDR. $135 billion of debt financing they have available to provide a competitive advantage in critical technology areas that support our long-term export competition that we have with some of our pacing challengers. So there's a significant amount of tools and resources that are available in this country today that we hope to start bringing to bear, and then hope in the long term create the expertise and the authorities and appropriations inside of the Department of Defense to start doing more of this work.
So let me pivot back to Bilal. Apart from being one of the most famous consumers of Dunkin' Donuts coffee, if you follow him on social media in general, as you mentioned, you're also an immigrant who got his PhD from MIT, right?
I was just giving out my resume.
Yeah, I should pick that up, actually. As a founder yourself, as well as an investor, what do you need to see from the Pentagon, and I would also say the White House, more broadly when it comes to enabling access to human capital? This is a big issue in this country, right? We have a difficulty cultivating and then accessing homegrown and international human capital. So what do you want to see more of? And Katherine, I'm sure you might want to chime in on this as well.
So one of our friends who's not here, but often on these panels, is from Founders Fund, Trey, that we have often, both of us have co-invested with, founder of Anduril. And I remember early pitches of Anduril, and he used to talk about looking through where the top graduates of the top computer science programs in this country go. And I think the results he came up with, not one of them end up at any of the primes. You don't graduate from Carnegie Mellon University in robotics or perception or computer science and decide what I really wanted to do was go work for Raytheon. That used to be the case maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, but that has not been the case for the last 10, 20 years. So those people are going somewhere. Where they're going? Well, the last 20 years, we have created a bonanza of economic opportunity in Silicon Valley. And by Silicon Valley, I mean not just the geography, but that industry of technology industry. So the best talent went in, and unfortunately, a whole bunch of them were optimizing clicks so you get more ads, or creating dating apps, or photo sharing ads and so on, and that was great business. It was, in some ways, great economic opportunity for them, but a little bit of a loss to the country. I think Katherine pointed out that trend is starting to change. Very early days, but we're starting to see more founders, not only young founders who have a sense of patriotism, but also the sense of purpose and mission that they want to do something interesting, but also people who made their money in those industries, now saying, I want to do something more meaningful with my life, right? Parma Lucky made money building hardware, software system for gaming applications primarily. But now he's building arguably one of the most interesting defense tech companies. Kessler and Peter were also entrepreneurs who built companies elsewhere, sold to Google, worked at Google, now building these companies like Applied Intuition. So we're seeing that, and I think there's a little bit of a movement in that direction. But we want to make sure that these guys can see their products get into the hands of users. Nothing drives a technologist who decides to enter the industry more than seeing their creation in the hands of users and being used. It doesn't matter what you're creating. You could be creating a cybersecurity software that sits at the back end and nobody knows that even exists, right? Or you could be creating the most sexiest drone that gets on CNN because it does loitering and does swarming and I don't know what, right? Doesn't matter. You want to see your product get used by people and get the feedback that this is really working, this is scaling. I launched it, it was manufactured here, it was sold here, the company's revenues grew, and so on and so forth. That is what people are looking for. The reason why companies like Applied Intuition and Anduril are able to attract amazing talent is because they're able to show that we have real traction, not because VCs are backing them, right? Like that dies very quickly. So I think if you think about the talent pool that needs to happen, I would say two things. Number one, we need to make sure that the companies that are working in this sector are able to get closer to their customers and are able to get the kind of product uplift that's needed. There's no doubt in my mind that these products are amazing. There's no doubt in my mind that these products create value. But for most of these companies, the path to commercialization is blocked by the bureaucracy. Some of them are represented in this room, right? Like there's 18 people you have to talk to and 9 levels of TRL that you have to go through, and yet at the dinner table last night, somebody was saying, well, I'm from Louisiana, I don't know how my senator can support you because you don't have a manufacturing facility in Louisiana. Well, shit no, we don't have a manufacturing facility in Louisiana because the company is based in Michigan and it has like 37 employees. So we have to change that. And then the second thing I'd say is immigration. And I say that as an immigrant founder myself. You go to any of these companies, any of the top technology companies, and you will see it's a lot of immigrants working in these companies. And it's not just immigrants from China and India and other places. It's also immigrants from Eastern Europe and other places. These are, these are people that are patriotic, they are hardworking, they genuinely, I say this, the same way I feel myself, they genuinely value what America has. Right? Like I have seen what, having lived in places that doesn't have the kind of freedoms or the kind of, the fact that I can sit here and have this conversation, this is not possible in my own country where I came from. Right? So these people really care for that, and by shutting that spigot off, we're creating problems. And we're basically turning the tap off and saying, inshallah, something will happen.
If I could just add something there, we have a mutual company that we've invested in. Again, to that list of companies where there'll be more names. This is one that I think you'll be hearing more about. But a company called Hadrian, founded by an Australian founder, and it is a company that's building automated machine shops for aerospace and defense manufacturing, working with a number of companies you all know. And when we first met, I asked Chris. I said, you're Australian. And you are talking, you have an American flag behind you. You're talking about building the defense industrial base in this country. Why do you care? I don't hear that many people talking about this. Why do you as an Australian care? And he said, he's like, America is either going to be the leader in the world or China is going to be the leader in the world. And Australians have a vested interest in making sure that America is the leader. Like like people care deeply about the American dream and about the it's not only coming here to build a company, but also the making sure that the rest of the world feels secure. And it was the first time I had heard a founder really put it in that sort of stark terms of sort of the dire need of what he was building. And so I think we really do need to realize that not only is Silicon Valley this place that attracts so many terrific entrepreneurs who want to work because of the American dream, but they also care deeply about this American dynamism mission. They care deeply about the national security mission. And it's something that I think is really core to the future success going forward.
So, Katherine, last year you wrote, and I'm going to quote this here, "Dynamism in America is not being spurred by policy in Washington. It's being driven by a growing group of technologists that are solving problems of immense national importance. And as technology becomes less of a sector and more of a means of acceleration that touches every industry and every aspect of society, we'll see more solutions for American problems coming from engineers, technologists, and startup founders. Washington and Silicon Valley are going to have to become friends," end quote. So, how should investors and founders begin to think about leading defense policymakers? Again, not the other way around. How should investors and founders think about leading defense policymakers towards the right solutions, or is this even possible?
So I think it's possible, but I also think it's sort of like give unto Caesar what is Caesar. Like you all are really good at policy. Like we are not great at making policy. And I think like the thing that we're very good at, both investors and founders, is building companies. We know how to do that. Sometimes you see that sort of get mixed up where people in Silicon Valley want to engage in policy, they want to engage in moralizing, they want to get on soapboxes and talk about how to make the world a better place. Like, no, actually we should be building companies and we should be building for specific problems. Whereas policymakers should be building policies that are informed by, what are the best decisions that are going to allow for the to procure the best technologies for specific requirements. So I think like that's something that actually we should respect in each other. We shouldn't let those lines cross. Sometimes you see people who've worked in government for many, many years think that they understand company building, and it's not the case. It's a very different manner of building companies in Silicon Valley, a very specific type, a very specific timeline. That's hard to learn if you haven't done it, if you haven't been in the ecosystem, if you don't understand the talent networks. So I think that's a very important part of it. But two, I also think, again, it goes back to like why we started this practice, why we care so much about it, is that this is not something that, policy is necessarily going to lead to more and more founders building companies. This is something that's happening organically. It's an organic movement. There's more and more people who are capable of building the scale of the companies that we all know and love that we've mentioned multiple times on this panel. So I think in some ways, the how they're going to work together, we're going to have more founders now who are taking more attempts. I actually think the last 7-8 years have been very fruitful in terms of creating a shared learnings, a culture where there's a lot of dialogue now. We actually come to Washington. That was not the case maybe 5 years ago. We were still sort of siloed in our own sort of pools of talent and sort of pools of incentives. And so I'm very hopeful. Yes, it will certainly happen. And I think the best thing that we can do is we can be focused on building the companies and investing in the best companies and share those learnings across and leave policy to the people in this room who are very good at making policy.
So along those lines, I remember going to a number of these great Andreessen Horowitz events 7-8 years ago with like Ted and Matt Spence and others and Matt Colford, who they're all at different places now. Andreessen's got this new initiative, American Dynamism, and I guess I'll direct us towards Bilal, and then feel free, each of you, to respond as well. Bilal, you've been in this space a while, as we already talked about. How is from an investing thesis perspective, how has that changed as Lux has gotten more, I guess, into this space? I remember having conversations with you and also Josh, your colleague Josh Wolf, about the defense, what we now call the defense tech sector, 10 years ago, and it was very much kind of mum's the word, Bilal's kind of our guy, he's doing a couple of these companies, and then now it's become this big thing. Andreessen's got this major new initiative which could be directly accretive as well. So as an investor, how has your thesis had to adapt, or has it just been simply a matter of putting more shots on goal in a concentrated area?
No, the thesis, well, there's a lot of things you can mean by thesis, but the broader umbrella of ideas remains the same, which is invest at the intersection of technology and sciences. We spend a tremendous amount of money as a country, thankfully, putting money into fundamental research in areas that are far out into the future. We give a lot of money to our universities. We give, I was funded by an Air Force grant for my PhD program, looking at cloud formation, and maybe if climate change is real, we will be using that work to create artificial clouds and rain. We put a lot of money into our national labs and so on and so forth, and we have amazing innovations that come out that are not commercialized and certainly not heralded as the importance that they deserve. All of us are carrying touch screens in our pocket, right? It feels like a natural thing that everything is a touchscreen. In fact, I get pissed that my laptop does not have a touchscreen because I happen to be using an Apple. I don't understand why it doesn't, right? But somebody had to invent the electronics that went into creating that touchscreen. And somebody, Steve Jobs or whoever was at, Tony Fadell or whoever, had to identify that that is available. Because all of you will remember those iPods that had a little scroll that we went going down the songs, right? And that was natural, and that was cool, until the touchscreen came out and changed the world. And I think that exists everywhere, in every segment. So our thesis was that these amazing innovations that come out that don't get the attention they deserve, shine the light on them. That was Lux. The word Lux means light. Shine the light on these innovations and create companies around them. What has changed in defense tech investing for us over the last 10, 15 years of doing this is, it is not about technology alone. In fact, I would argue it's actually less about technology than it is about the ability to sell, to be able to create the successfully large companies that Katherine was talking about. Pretty much any domain we look at, technology being presented to us by any startup, whether it's 2 kids and a dog, or whether it's a company like Applied Intuition, it's just world class. It completely beats anything that the status quo is. It completely beats anything that other companies have to offer, meaning the incumbents have to offer. The problem is always that most of the companies don't know how to sell into the DOD. We haven't cracked the code. I've been doing this for 10, 15 years. I spend significant amount of time in DC, and I still sit at dinner, like last night, and try to decipher what are these things that people are talking about. You had breakfast with Jason, and Jason explained to me all the various offices he has to talk to just to be able to get a small amount of budget allocated that he's trying to create for all the good things that he just talked about, right? So there's a bureaucratic morass, for lack of better words, that has been created, probably for good reasons over the last 50, 70, 80 years, but we haven't figured out how to cut through that, and we have to figure out how to do that. When you start a company in Silicon, Applied Intuition has a big commercial business, right? When you want to hire a head of sales, you have dozens, if not hundreds of companies that you go to and you say, who's a great salesperson who knows how to do software sales, who knows how to do enterprise sales, who knows how to do sales abroad. And you go and find and you get the best ideas, you get the best people, and you hire and build a team. Start thinking about that from government. Like, if I want to hire the world's best government relations person for a startup that has raised $10 million, where do I go to hire that person? CEOs, I was on a call while I was here yesterday, a CEO called me, we're getting a lot of interest from these SBIR programs and blah, 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 and they have a very successful commercial business. Knows nothing about the DOD business. What do I need to do? Should I talk to T2, who's, obviously 4-star general commander and, of the SOCOM? I'm like, no, not yet. I mean, that's not exactly the right place to start. Then what do I need to do? Well, do I need to hire a government relations person, a salesperson, business development person, somebody on the Hill? So these are questions that might seem very easy to you, but for the innovators who are building companies, that's not so trivial and easy. And I think that's the thing that has changed, that a lot of our effort now goes into finding people who have the ability to navigate that and figure that out. That's the difference between, Applied Intuition, finding their way and finding customer base, when many other automotive companies, software companies have not been able to do that. Or Anduril, or Shield AI, or Varda, or Hadrian. That's the fundamental difference, that they're able to navigate their way, build relationships, and find that. Now, it's a very complex thing, creates a lot of hindrances, and most companies fail. Most amazing innovations are not coming to you. You're not even hearing about them because they don't know how to say that. At dinner last night, there was a bunch of chiefs of staff, a bunch of congressmen. I was at dinner with this. They're like, just call us. I'm like, I don't even know who the heck you are. What do you mean call you? This is like a politician. This is like the president of the United States saying, why don't you just tell me? Like, how do I tell you? To send a note, email? Like, is there an email address somewhere? Right? I go to InQtel CEO Summit, half the people walking around are John T, Paul S. Like, who am I supposed to call? Paul S at CIA? Like, And this is not, I mean, sounds like a joke to you, but it's reality. I've been for 10 years nonstop at the In-Q-Tel CEO Summit, and I keep meeting these first-name people. I'm waiting for a call back from them when they'll tell me that, hey, this cybersecurity company could be very relevant for us. So I think these are real bottlenecks that we just have to grease the system so that innovations can come to you guys can hear about it, and we don't end up in a situation where, like we did when Zuckerberg was on the Hill talking about it and everybody's making fun of all the people on the other side not knowing what Facebook really is, or when Sam Altman comes in and everybody's asking, tech support on what prompt I need to write to get the right answer. That is happening because, there's, Mark Andreessen said that yesterday, California being on the other side of the country maybe feels isolated. Most of the country doesn't care about what these guys are doing. And for the longest time, that was true. While we were making dating apps and social media apps and photo sharing apps, maybe you didn't have to think about them very much. But they're building AI systems that are powering our, weapons deployments, right? They're building AI systems that will, drive our F-16s. They're building automated factories that if you don't use them here, somebody else anywhere else in the world will start getting access to. And our adversaries have pretty close to the same technologies available to them. I think that's a challenge that we need to solve.
If I could just add to the amount of engagement that I've seen from companies and from investors coming out to DC. I mean, we just moved to DC a few years ago, so I'm brand new. But even since then has been a phenomenal rise. And I do think it is important for us to think about the ways in which we can collaborate in more meaningful modalities in the future. One of the ways that I was really excited about the engagement was having more of our DOD folks out in Silicon Valley and out in other tech hubs. And the growth of organizations like DIU, which, Mike Brown in the audience as just a visionary leader for that organization. What I see happening now under Doug Beck, I think is a phenomenal way for us to expand that activity in a more meaningful way, because there should be front doors, right? I mean, when we stood up AFWorks, it was supposed to be a front door for the Air Force, right? DIU front door for OSD. I think the key here, though, to Bilal, if I hear you correctly, it's not just about having one engagement, right? There needs to be a tighter amount of work from a market research perspective, from an understanding perspective, that there are companies that exist in meaningful ways that can meet the needs of the Department of Defense. And those companies are a far more diverse set of companies than I think we typically engage with inside of the DI. I know certainly as a young acquisitions professional that I dealt with, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons that led me to research why more companies didn't want to work with us, because nobody was responding to my BAA that I posted on Fed BizOps, and I expected everybody to look up that, like all these companies to understand that that's where they have to go. Tools that we know so well in these kind of entrenched networks. And so the breaking down of those networks, which I'll also say is a scary thing. It is a scary thing to break down these entrenched networks. We have to find ways to do efficient partnerships, do it ethically with no conflicts of interest, because government is hard. Public policy is hard. It's hard because there are a lot of factors that go into decision making that are not just about getting the best technology into the hands of the warfighter. You have to do it in the right way. Process is important. It's important because we as taxpayers expect fair and open competition. And I believe we can do it. I believe we can have stronger partnerships with a wide range of companies and investors in a meaningful way, and do it in the lens of an ethical framework that makes it not only an important part of the process, because I will say, at the end of the day, venture does very well without the department, and honestly, you could say the department does well without venture. I mean, if you think about the entrenched networks of how we got to where we were, and I think what we're seeing today is that we can do a lot better together, and do a lot better together because our current strategic competition requires a level of partnership that it may not have required 20 years ago. And it requires it, and will require it for the long term. This is not going to go away tomorrow. This is not going to go away in 5 years. This is going to be a long-term competition, and we need to find ways to break down these barriers, or else I think we're going to be in a world of hurt.
So, lightning round as we wrap up. Selfishly, what's the one reform you want to see in the Pentagon this year, and why?
So I asked some of our companies this, who will remain nameless, but the one that I thought was really interesting was removing past performance requirements for emerging technologies. And this is so counterintuitive to people in Silicon Valley. If I could just take 1 second, I know it's lightning round, but so counterintuitive that you would give 100-year-old companies benefit of what they did 100 years ago when we're talking about new technologies like artificial intelligence. It is mind-blowing that that is part of the process for choosing companies that are going to lead the future. It's the opposite of how we operate in Silicon Valley, and I think if we've removed that, there would be a ton more innovation coming through your door.
I would take some of this SBIR money and turn it into large product purchase decision-making authority given to end users. How you do that, you guys figure that out, but at least half of the SBIR money, if not all of it, is totally wasted right now. That's my opinion. I know Jason will probably disagree with that, but take that, give it to whoever your end customer is, and say, go buy $30 million worth of product that you need to buy.
Well, maybe I might switch the question a little bit since I'm in the Pentagon. I would say continual collaboration with the Hill on affording the department the authorities to do things like that. Our Strat 5 program required an exception to policy, a massive exception to policy in partnership with the SBA, continual collaboration on ways that we can accelerate these investments and bring new capabilities, new tools in the toolbox is going to be really important.
Well, thank you again. Thanks to each of you. This is really exciting. I actually learned a lot, and I know you did too, at a minimum. I think I'm very funny, and Bilal's actually funny. So have a good day. Cheers.